Alp Arslan was the second Seljuk Sultan of Persia and Iraq and a member of the Turkish dynasty which revitalized Muslim rule in the declining days of the Abbasid Caliphate. Alp Arslan was born Muhammad ibn Dud in the Arab Empire's Persian province of Khorasan in 1026. He was the great-grandson of Seljuk, chieftain of the Guz Turkomans, who had invaded southwestern Asia in the 11th century. Alp Arslan was the son of Chagray and nephew of Tugril, the founding sultans of the Seljuk Empire. His grandfather was Mikhail, who in turn was the son of the warlord Seljuk. He was the father of numerous children, including Malik Shadai and Tudashai. It is unclear who the mother or mothers of his children were. He was known to have been married at least twice. His wives included the widow of his uncle Tugril, a Karakhanid princess known as Akka Khatun, and the daughter or niece of Bagrai IV of Georgia. One of Seljuk's other sons was the Turkic chieftain Arslan Isra'il, whose son, Kutalmish, contested his nephew's succession to the sultanate. Alp Arslan's younger brothers Suleiman ibn Chagray and Kavert were his rivals. Kilij Arslan, the son and successor of Suleiman ibn Kutalmish, was a major opponent of the Franks during the First Crusade and the Crusade of 1101. Upon his father's illness, Alp Arslan halted the attacks of Ghaznavids by taking over the rule of the state when he was very young. The victories he won against Karakhanids and Ghaznavids while his father was still alive allowed him to gain reputation in the Khorasan Seljuks, whom he ruled as the heir in the last years of Arbay, and even in the entire Seljuk territory. For this reason, he became the Melik of Khorasan upon the death of Arbay in 1059. Alp Arslan refused to accept the Sultanate of Slayman, who was ascended to the throne by Sultan Tughril's will, since Sultan Tughril died without leaving a son and began to struggle. He had to go against the emirs of Hudlan and Sknayan and his uncle Inanmihubnug, who revolted all upon the death of Tughril Bey. Alp Arslan, who discouraged Inanmihubnug by defeating him and left him at his own place, moved to Ray, the capital of the empire, with a huge army after suppressing the rebels. However, during the delay caused by these occupations, Kutalm, who declared his sultanate by having a khutbah given in his name, moved towards Ray with his army of 50,000 men and put the confronting forces to rout. As for Slayman, he initially left Ray, then retreated to Shiraz after noticing his weakness compared to his rivals, who hadn't accepted his sultanate. Kavard, the Melik of Kerman, who came near Isfahan, upon Alp Arslan's entry to the government, returned to his lands and had a khutbah given in the name of Alp Arslan. After Alp Arslan ascended to the throne and minted coin having a khutbah given in his name, his sultanate was approved and announced by the Abbasid Caliph Kanbimril. During his reign, Alp Arslan gave more weight to the western expansion of the empire, organized campaigns in the west for conquests and in the east for securing the order. The main reason was that East Anatolian high plateaus, which were discovered during the expeditions on Byzantium 45 years ago by his father Arbay, were assumed to be the best place for settling Turkoman. These Turkoman, who spread to all over the Seljuk territory and occasionally caused some social distresses with the ceaseless ongoing migrations since the beginning of the 11th century, had to be settled in a country which fit the conditions they were accustomed to. Famed as a military leader, Alp Arslan, his name means lion hero, began his career campaigning extensively for his father, Dud Shagribag, commander of the Turkoman forces in Khorasan. Upon his father's death in 1059-1060, Alp Arslan succeeded. Meanwhile, Seljuk forces under Chagray's brother, Tughril Beg, had ended a century of Shiite Buyid dominance in Baghdad, whereupon Caliph Al-Qaim made him sultan. With Tughrel's death in 1063, Alp Arslan succeeded, despite an attempt to enthrone Tughrel's brother Suleiman. Between the suppression of recalcitrant subordinates, Alp Arslan campaigned against his neighbors. His first major move was a raid in 1064 into Georgia and Armenia, during which the Georgian king acknowledged Seljuk suzerainty. The following year the Sultan led his forces into Transoxiana. In 1070 he took Aleppo during a campaign into Syria. His holdings then reached from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. Alp Arslan was a courageous man, generous in his treatment of opponents. His strength lay in the military realm, domestic affairs being handled by his Persian vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, founder of the administrative organization which characterized and strengthened the Sultanate during the reigns of Alp Arslan and his son. Military fiefs, governed by Seljuk princes, were established to provide support for the soldiery and to accommodate the nomadic Turks to the established Persian agricultural scene. Alp Arslan moved from Ri to Azerbaijan with Malik Shah, whom he loved the most amongst his children, and with Nizam al-Mulk, his former vizier whom he brought from Khorasan. By continuing the conquests along the path to eastern Anatolia, he besieged Ani, the best-guarded city of Byzantines in the region. On August 16, 1064 the city was captured by Seljuks. Further action in Asia Minor was put on hold, however, when Alp Arslan took up the request of Baghdad to deal with the Fatimids in Egypt. He mounted a major expeditionary force, first taking Aleppo in Syria. Now his empire stretched from eastern Persia to the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, however, his troops were resisting renewed efforts by the Byzantine Emperor Romanus IV Diogenes to push the Seljuks out of Asia Minor. By 1070 these efforts had succeeded in part, and Alp Arslan's army had been shoved back across the Euphrates again. Word reached Alp Arslan that the Byzantine Emperor was planning to mount an even more powerful attack against the Seljuk army left behind in Asia Minor. Romanus assembled an army consisting of 200,000 troops, recruiting the faithful and hiring the rest. These mercenaries included Norsemen, Slavs, Turks, and even French Normans. Many Sicilians served in his officer corps. Romanus began moving these men east in the summer of 1071, hoping to take the Seljuks by surprise and secure the territory of Armenia as a buffer zone against them. When word of this Byzantine advance reached Alp Arslan, he cut short his campaign against Egypt in the Fatimids, leaving outside Ibn back, his vassal in charge of the campaign, and led his army to rejoin his other men in Armenia. Outsize used this opportunity and newfound power to attack and greatly damage Jerusalem, thus releasing the city from Fatimid control. Subsequently, however, the Seljuk rulers refused to allow pilgrims of various faiths to gain access to the holy spots of the city, a policy that would have lasting consequences. Meanwhile, Alp Arslan gathered his forces near Manzikert, north of Lake Van. Vastly outnumbered by the Byzantine forces, Alp Arslan and his men managed to trap the imperial army thanks to the superior tactics of their cavalry. It also helped that large numbers of mercenary forces deserted Romanus just before the fighting began. The Byzantine soldiers were defeated, and Romanus was taken prisoner, the first time a Byzantine emperor had ever been captured by a Muslim leader. However, instead of taking the captive to Baghdad to show him off, Alp Arslan decided to use the emperor to regain lost land, form an alliance with Byzantium, and attain a long-lasting truce with the Byzantine Empire. Once the ransom for Romanus was paid and he had been returned to Constantinople, the emperor found himself ousted, or removed, from the throne by a new monarch, who imprisoned and blinded him. When Romanus died in prison, the treaty with the Seljuks ended with his death. However, the victory at Manzikert still opened all of Byzantium to Turkish invasions by roving bands, who nibbled away at much of Asia Minor over the next decade. Next, Alp Arslan returned to reconquer his homeland and to battle once again against the Karakhanids of Transoxania. Before he and his men could cross the Oxus River, south of the Aral Sea, he had to capture a fortress defended by Yusuf Kothul, the governor of the region. When the fortress fell, Yusuf was brought before Arslan, whom, forgetting his usual mercy toward prisoners, ordered that the man be killed. Arslan's famous skill in archery came into play in this final act of his life, for when Yusuf began to curse the Sultan, Arslan commanded his guards to untie Yusuf's rope bonds. Taking aim with bow and arrow, Arslan had decided to kill the prisoner himself. But his marksmanship failed him at this critical moment, and the arrow missed Yusuf. Taking advantage of the occasion, Yusuf suddenly leaped at Arslan, drawing a hidden dagger, and stabbed the Sultan. Arslan died of his wounds a few hours later, but not before making his peace with God for his arrogance. Arslan used his last breath to name his son, Malik Shah, his successor. During his short reign, Alp Arslan had managed to cut deeply into the Byzantine Empire, delivering a blow at Manzikert from which the empire would never recover. Though the Byzantine Empire stumbled on for almost 4 more centuries, it would never regain the power it had before the arrival of Arslan and the great Seljuks of Persia. Thank you for accompanying us so far. For your support, thank you for commenting on the subscriber and how you felt about this video.